Okay, thank you very much for the invitation. Apologies up front that I'm not able to speak in Greek. I've spent many of my holidays in your beautiful country. Actually, I've already booked my vacation for next year, close to Pylos, that I'm looking forward to. But I haven't kind of taken on the language here because everybody in Greece speaks very good English. I'm in charge of global pricing and market access at Hoffmann La Roche in Basel. And I will speak about managed innovation and managed entry agreements. The background for my presentation is a task force that I was privileged to participate in that the International Society for Pharmacoeconomics and Outcomes Research convened, and that was looking at the increasing use of managed entry agreements and which the ISPOR task force used the even more complicated title performance-based risk-sharing arrangements for. The way it was defined was a commercial arrangement that involves a plan by which the performance of the product is tracked in a defined patient population over a specified period of time, and the level of reimbursement is based on the health and the cost outcomes achieved. So the idea here is that these arrangements would not have a fixed price for a pill or for a vial of this medicine, but eventually the reimbursement that is provided for this therapy is adjusted based on the outcomes that are delivered for patients. The background for these arrangements to become more popular over the last 10 years is basically linked to my previous speaker here that outlined that we are seeing some really amazing breakthroughs in how we understand diseases, how we understand the mechanisms behind those diseases, and how we can now design, invent, and develop therapies for this. The process of innovation is inherently risky, but even when these medicines come to market, the outcomes are not fully understood. There is still some uncertainty for these medicines. It is different when you bring the 10th beta blocker to market to treat hypertension. You know pretty well what this medicine does. When Gleevec, imatinib, was brought into the market, nobody expected how great the benefits for patients would be. Nobody knew how long to treat. And there was an uncertainty around the real performance of these medicines, and there was an unwillingness of payers to bear that uncertainty and pay for an uncertain outcome. When do we have these uncertain outcomes? Well, specifically in areas where medicines provide long-term benefits to patients that have not been adequately studied in the clinical development program. Nobody can run a 10-year clinical development program to understand what those long-term outcomes are, and no patient wants to wait for such a trial to complete if we have an early indication that there is a significant benefit for patients, that there is a high response rate, that there is a good control of the disease. We still have many therapies that come to market where we don't know exactly in which patients they will really provide the best benefits. So there is heterogeneity of the treatment effect by patients, and so in those patients where there is a good response, the price may be justified, but there may also be patients that don't respond, and if you have to give an expensive therapy to patients that don't respond, there's obviously a concern for payers, and the question was, can we find arrangements for this? There are many new therapies that are approved now by the regulatory agencies on the basis of accelerated procedures. We already heard that there is now the category of breakthrough designation in the US, so medicines can be approved on the basis of one-arm clinical trials on endpoints that are biomarker for the progression of the disease, but these are not the endpoints that payers and also patients ultimately are looking for, which is long-term survival, which is improvement of their morbidity. And we have many of these therapies, and for example the immunotherapies that can be used in quite a number of different diseases. We don't fully understand how many diseases, but we believe that different cancers will benefit from this. Now, the extent of the benefit in these different patient populations and different diseases will differ for that same medicine. And in a situation where you don't know exactly how the medicine is going to be used and what the extent of the benefit is, it is good then to have a mechanism that links the level of reimbursement to the actual benefit that has been achieved for these patients. That is what is behind these performance-based risk-sharing arrangements. Basically, it is a form of continuing research while these medicines are already in the market, recognizing there is some uncertainty that can be resolved, and putting the appropriate evidence programs in place. So the common aspects of these performance-based risk-sharing arrangements are that there is a program of data collection, either that every patient is included in a clinical trial or a clinical trial is run in parallel with the reimbursement that is provided. It is typically initiated during the time period following the regulatory approval, so at that time when the medicine is first introduced. The price, reimbursement, and/or the revenue is linked to the outcome of that program of data collection. So if this data collection doesn't confirm the benefit that we expected for this, then there has to be some financial reconciliation on behalf of the manufacturer. Conversely, if the benefits are larger, there are also mechanisms then to adjust the price or the reimbursement for this medicine, for example, to make it available to a broader population of patients. The data collection is intended to address the uncertainty, and so overall these arrangements provide a different distribution of risk. Those of you that have already attended the session before that saw Erika Whittaker speak about this typology of different performance-based risk-sharing arrangements. When you look at the totality, there are arrangements that are purely cost-based. So basically, this is around saying that in a country, I'm asking for a price, but at the same time, I'm offering a discount on every individual vial or pill that I'm saying. These are cost-sharing arrangements. We would not consider those as performance-based arrangements. With the performance-based arrangements, there are those that are more towards utilization of that medicine, and we have seen a number of examples. Often it is around dose capping or episode of care capping for these medicines. Some examples were shown around Lucentis. These are arrangements that look at reducing the decision uncertainty that we have for these medicines. So typically these programs are called coverage with evidence development. So a medicine is admitted into the market, there is reimbursement for this, but every patient is included in a registry, and out of that registry we can then analyze the true outcomes for these patients and can adjust the reimbursement at a later stage. What we have to recognize is that we will always have to make decisions in the face of uncertainty. In medicine, there is no absolute certainty, so the question is not, can we avoid the uncertainty? The question is, how can we manage the uncertainty? How can we reduce the inappropriate uncertainty around that? In order to achieve that, we need to have a clearly defined question that we are addressing here. So, for example, the question that we saw on the imatinib situation, can we discontinue treatment after a certain period of time in a certain population of patients and still maintain that benefit? We need to be able to answer these questions in an appropriate amount of time. Some of you may have heard that one of the first performance-based risk-sharing arrangements was around interferons for multiple sclerosis in the UK. It was introduced in 2000. This study has been ongoing for 14 years and nobody has seen any results from this because the question that was asked was not very specific and the design was not able to answer that question. So this was more or less just an extra effort that was done to control utilization, but there was no real clinical knowledge gained from this study. With reasonable effort and cost, a lot of effort has already been invested in bringing these products to market. So we have to put the amount in relation to the extra learning that we will get from these experiments. And it has to reduce the decision uncertainty. And I highlight decision uncertainty for the methodologists in the room. It is not just around the parameter uncertainty. We may have a lot of uncertainty around a point estimate for a response rate, but the decision whether or not to reimburse that medicine may be clear because it is so so obvious that this medicine provides a huge benefit that is in line with the cost that is charged for this medicine. But then there are areas where the parameter estimate may be very small actually, but because the price is very high, you still need to understand exactly what the benefit is for individual patients. So these programs address decision uncertainty for the healthcare systems, for the providers in the healthcare systems, rather than parameter uncertainty. When we make decisions, we can always make wrong decisions. There are two types of wrong decisions, type 1 and type 2 errors. The false positive decisions are those where we provide access for patients to these medicines, collect additional data, and find that our initial assumptions were overstated. I mean, this happens. That is something which we observe through these programs, and we can correct it. These are situations where I think also as a manufacturer we have to then acknowledge that if we had a wrong assumption on these benefits, we overstated this, that there need to be clear arrangements around disinvestment and potential financial reconciliation for the money that has been invested into these therapies. The other error could be a false negative. We are not making these medicines available to patients. Now the problem here is we never observe what the real benefit would have been for patients. We save a lot of money, but we probably risk the lives of these patients in here. So in this situation, when we are looking at innovation, I think in case of doubt, there should be a decision in favor of the defendant here and say, let's put these programs in place, let's manage the uncertainty, let's collect the data so that we can then come to a better decision. These decisions affect both the regulatory pathways and the reimbursement and payer pathways. And this is something where we need to have more dialogue, both as a manufacturer with these individual authorities, but also with both authorities together, because one of the reasons why we are increasingly in need for these arrangements is that the regulators are willing to accept the uncertainty where they see a clear scientific rationale for these medicines. They are willing to accept biomarkers for identifying the right patient populations and the outcomes, and we see that with the breakthrough designations and others. So there is actually less evidence that is available for these medicines when they enter the market, because we know they are targeting an area of high unmet need for patients and have the potential for large benefit here. The payers are more concerned about paying the full price in here, and there is a bias against innovation which is inherent in many of the HTA methods that are used by payers, because HTA methods, they look at the here and now, they look at what do we know at this point in time, they don't ask the question what may we know in 5 or 10 years when we have better understood these medicines, and so this is something that we need to discuss between regulators and payers. There is the term that we now have to also consider the uncertainty in the prices that we set for this. So while we don't have all the certainty, is there something like an uncertainty discount that the manufacturer would grant to the healthcare payer? It has to be something that is negotiated on a country-by-country basis, because we are living in an international reference pricing system, and different countries have different expectations here. What we also find is that often is the uncertainty is not around the outcomes, the uncertainty is around the utilization of these medicines. And I've indicated that many medicines now in the space of personalized medicine have different benefits depending on in which patient populations they are being used, or in which combination they are being used. And this concept that we have one price for a medicine is probably not valid anymore in a personalized healthcare environment. So we need to find systems that monitor the utilization and then reduce the uncertainty by having arrangements around what is the appropriate price for this medicine in the specific way that is being used. These arrangements have been very popular because we've had so many breakthrough medicines reaching the markets. The experience with implementing these arrangements has been very frustrating, because it is basically putting all the effort on the nurses in the hospital, on the doctors that are treating these patients, because we don't have efficient systems to collect the data that provide us then with the basis for these studies that we want to do. Where treatment registries have been available, this was facilitated. Where countries were willing to put stricter criteria onto electronic health records and provide a common nomenclature how hospitals and doctors in that country collect information, both on the use of the medicine but also on the characteristic of patients. This has been done. This has been much easier to implement. In the U.S., there are some healthcare systems like Kaiser Permanente in California or Geisinger on the East Coast that are often cited as the best examples that we can learn from. In Europe, it is certainly Italy, and I think we'll hear more about that. Since 2006, IFA and hospitals in Italy have demonstrated that this information can be collected in a very efficient way. And in the UK now for 2 years, we have what is called the Systemic Anti-Cancer Therapy Database, where a certain data set is collected for every patient that is treated. We have been collaborating with all these stakeholders from Roche, and we have worked with the data privacy organizations in countries, with IT providers to establish a rigid framework that basically models the way that we do good clinical trials that can be applied here, and that allows us to collect the data in a way that protects data privacy for patients. It starts with having a clear, defined minimum data set that needs to be collected, and this is relatively small. We are speaking about 40 items roughly that have to be collected, and many hospital systems and many office-based practice management systems are already collecting these data. There has to be an extraction and anonymization from this. It is not appropriate to give out independent, individual patient-level data, but aggregated analyses that show how many patients have been treated, with what outcome, in what combination, with what therapy is totally acceptable. This is the data that would then leave the hospital or the practice of a physician and be used by the healthcare system together with the manufacturer to apply these analyses, this research, looking at how outcomes and reimbursement are then addressed, and would allow then to administer these schemes both in terms of the medical outcomes as well as the financial outcomes. Are these schemes effective? I hope I'm not stealing a slide that the next speaker will speak about, but there was a publication for Italy, which was a country where in the past access for patients to new innovations was relatively slow, and with the introduction of these risk-sharing arrangements, it has been drastically improved from a median of 342 days, so basically 1 year, down to something which is now faster than 3 months, and that is really 9 additional months that patients can benefit from these medicines. My outlook for performance-based risk-sharing arrangements, we will see them becoming more important because of our advances in science, because there are new, really innovative medicines reaching the markets, and that we want to make available to patients, but in a way that the risk is shared between both the manufacturer and the payer. We're looking at addressing disease areas that have very long outcomes. Alzheimer's is, for example, an area that we are very active in. Based on the clinical trials, we will know what happens over 3 to 5 years for patients. The real answer that we are looking for is what happens after 10 to 15 years for these patients. That's what we can only get from the real-world monitoring. And we will have more personalized healthcare, where we have to adjust the reimbursement depending on how these medicines need to be used. Ultimately, performance-based risk-sharing arrangements need to be coupled with what we also already heard from Professor Maniadakis, some form of value-based reimbursement that would go with that. Where there is more benefit, there should be a high level of reimbursement, and we need to make sure that we manage the spread between regulatory and payer evidence expectations here. My conclusion are that managed entry and performance-based risk-sharing arrangements can accelerate access for patients to true innovative therapies while reducing the uncertainty for payers and healthcare systems and creating a predictable pathway for industry. We need a clear agreement on what uncertainty to address in a feasible and realistic way, with a clear understanding of what the consequences are when we deliver on the expectations or over or potentially under-deliver on this. An area that I see of highest practical importance is that we collaborate between industry and healthcare systems to create efficient infrastructures, data infrastructures that we can monitor drug utilization and patient outcomes. Thank you very much for your attention.